Christmas dinner at the estate had always been elaborate, but this year felt different. My parents had insisted everyone arrive early, and my sister Victoria kept smirking at me across the table like she knew something I didn't. Halfway through dessert, Dad stood up with his wine glass raised. "Family, we have an announcement. Your mother and I have made an important decision about the estate. The estate, 8 bedrooms, 6 acres, worth approximately $2.3 million. The house where we'd grown up, where 3 generations of our family had lived. Victoria is getting married in the spring," Dad continued. "She and Marcus need a proper home to start their family. So we've decided to gift the estate to Victoria as her wedding present." I set down my fork slowly. Around the table, relatives applauded. Victoria beamed, already standing to hug our parents. "The paperwork is being drawn up now," Mom added. "We'll transfer the deed after New Year's. Victoria and Marcus can move in by February." "What about Harper?" my Aunt Susan asked, glancing at me. "Harper has her career," Dad said dismissively. "She's doing well with her little consulting business. She doesn't need family property." My little consulting business generated $890,000 annually, but my father had never taken it seriously because I worked from home in yoga pants instead of a suit in an office. "Harper can visit any time," Victoria said generously. "Maybe we'll let her use the guest house when she's in town." "Let me use the guest house. On the property I'd been quietly paying for." "Congratulations, Victoria," I said evenly. "That's quite a gift." "Thank you," she said, not catching my tone. "I know you understand. You're always traveling for work anyway. You'd never use this place properly." My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my attorney. "Deed transfer recorded. You're officially the sole owner. Merry Christmas." I smiled and took a sip of wine. "Dad, can I talk to you privately after dinner?" "If this is about the estate decision, it's final," he said firmly. "Oh, it's definitely about the estate. But I think you'll want to have this conversation in private." Hold up. An hour later, I sat with my parents in Dad's study. Victoria had insisted on joining us, Marcus trailing behind her. "If you're going to complain about the house going to Victoria, save it," Mom said before I could speak. "We've made our decision. Victoria is settling down, starting a family. That's what this estate is for." "I agree completely," I said. "Family estates should go to family. That's why I bought it." "Bought what?" Victoria asked. "The estate. I bought it from Mom and Dad 2 years ago." The silence was absolute. "That's not possible," Dad said finally. "We own this house. We've owned it for 35 years. You owned it until December 2021. Then you sold it to me for $1.2 million. I have the deed, the wire transfer records, and the signed purchase agreement." Mom's face had gone pale. "We never sold you anything." I pulled out my phone and opened my email. November 15, 2021. "Dad called me saying you were facing foreclosure. The reverse mortgage had come due, you'd missed 6 payments, the bank was threatening to take the house." "We worked that out," Dad protested. "I worked it out. I paid off the $847,000 you owed on the reverse mortgage. I bought the house from you for $1.2 million total. You stayed living here rent-free as my guests. Why would you do that without telling us?" Victoria demanded. "I did tell you. I explained everything in a family meeting 2 years ago. Dad, you said, 'Whatever you think is best, Harper,' and asked if I'd refill your wine. Mom, you said, 'That sounds complicated,' and changed the subject to Victoria's promotion." "I don't remember that," Mom said weakly. "I know. You didn't want to remember that you'd lost the house. So you convinced yourselves it never happened." Victoria stood up. "This is insane. You're lying to ruin my wedding gift." "I'm not lying." I pulled up the deed on my phone. Recorded December 3, 2021 with the county. Property transferred from Robert and Ellen Chin to Harper Chin. Sole owner. Dad grabbed reading glasses and looked at my phone screen. His face crumbled as he read. "You really bought it," he whispered. "I really saved it. You were 60 days from foreclosure. The bank was ready to auction the property. I paid them off and bought the house to keep you from losing everything." "So you own our home," Victoria said slowly, horror dawning on her face. "I own this house. You've all been living here as my guests for 2 years." "Guests," Mom repeated faintly. "Rent-free guests. Because you're my family and I wanted you to have stability. I've paid all property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and utilities for 2 years. About $147,000 total. Marcus spoke up for the first time. So Victoria can't receive it as a wedding gift. Victoria can't receive something that isn't my parents to give. Victoria's face was turning red. You let us plan everything. You let me tell Marcus this would be our home. You said congratulations. I said congratulations on your engagement. I never said anything about the house because I was curious how far you'd go. How far we'd go. Dad stood up angrily. Harper, this is our family home. This is my house that I bought to save from foreclosure. There's a difference. Revelation. Why didn't you stop us earlier? Mom asked. Before we announced it to everyone? Because I needed you to understand what you were doing. You weren't just making plans for a property you thought you owned. You were giving away something that wasn't yours without even checking who actually owned it. We assumed, Dad said. You assumed. And you know what happens when you assume? You announce at Christmas dinner that you're gifting your daughter a $2.3 million estate you don't own. Victoria was crying now. What am I supposed to tell Marcus? Tell everyone at dinner. Tell them the truth. Your parents tried to give you property they don't own. It happens. This is your fault, she turned on me. You should have reminded us you bought it. I did remind you. Multiple times. Last Christmas I mentioned I'd covered the property tax bill. Dad said, that's nice, and asked me to carve the turkey. In June I talked about hiring contractors for the roof repair. Mom said, whatever you think is best, and showed me Victoria's engagement photos. Those aren't the same as saying I own the house, Victoria insisted. I said exactly that. September at your engagement party. I said, I'm so glad we could host this at my house. You said it's everyone's house, and walked away to greet guests. The study was silent except for Victoria's crying. So what now? Marcus asked quietly. We were planning to move in next month. Now you find your own place to live. Like every other couple getting married. But the estate, Victoria started, is mine. You can visit for holidays. You can have your wedding reception here if you want. But you can't move in and claim it as yours. What about us? Mom asked. Do we have to leave? No. You can stay as long as you want. This is your home, you're just not the owners. I am. Dad sank back into his chair. I still don't understand how we forgot selling the house. You didn't forget. You rewrote history because the truth was uncomfortable. Losing the family estate to foreclosure, having your daughter bail you out. That didn't fit your narrative. So you adjusted the narrative. And you let us, Mom said accusingly. I let you live peacefully in a house I owned. I didn't correct your delusions because they weren't hurting anyone. Until today when you tried to give my property to Victoria. Victoria stood up abruptly. I can't do this. Marcus, we're leaving. Victoria, wait. Mom started. No. This whole night is ruined. Everyone downstairs thinks I'm getting an estate, and instead I'm getting humiliated. They left, Victoria's sobs echoing down the hallway. You really couldn't just let her have this? Dad asked quietly. Let her have my house. Oh, Dad. I couldn't. Resolution. The rest of Christmas dinner was subdued. Victoria and Marcus had left without explanation, and the remaining guests asked questions no one wanted to answer. I stayed long enough to be polite, then excused myself to the guest house on my property. My phone buzzed with increasingly angry texts from Victoria. You've ruined everything. Everyone thinks I'm an idiot. Mom and Dad are devastated. I responded to none of them. The next morning, Dad knocked on my door. Can we talk? I let him in. He looked exhausted, older than I'd ever seen him. I found the paperwork from the sale, he said quietly. In my files. You're right about everything. We signed it all. We knew we were selling. I know. I think we didn't want it to be true. So we pretended it wasn't. That's what I figured. Your mother is devastated. Victoria won't answer her calls. Victoria will get over it once she realizes she needs to find actual housing. Dad sat down on the couch. What do we do now? You keep living here. I keep paying the bills. Nothing changes except everyone knows the truth now. You're not going to kick us out? Why would I? I bought the house to keep you from losing it. That goal doesn't change just because Victoria threw a tantrum. She's embarrassed, Dad said. She told everyone she was getting an estate. Then she'll learn not to count assets she doesn't own. He nodded slowly. For what it's worth, thank you. For saving the house. For letting us stay. For not rubbing our faces in it until we forced your hand. You're welcome. After he left, I sat in the quiet guest house. My guest house on my property that I'd bought to save my parents from their own financial mismanagement. They'd tried to give it away because they'd convinced themselves it was still theirs. Because acknowledging the truth meant acknowledging they'd failed and I'd succeeded. 2 weeks later, Victoria called. I'm sorry, she said stiffly. I shouldn't have assumed the estate was mine. No, you shouldn't have. Can Marcus and I still have the wedding reception there? Yes. As my guests. Not as the owners. Right. As your guests. She hung up quickly, still unable to fully accept the reality. My parents stayed in the main house. I stayed in the guest house when I visited. The property taxes got paid, the utilities continued, the maintenance happened on schedule. Everything was exactly the same except now everyone knew who actually owned the estate. My mansion. My deed. My property that my family had tried to gift away without permission. They'd learned the expensive lesson that you can't give away what you don't own, no matter how much you wish you did. And I'd learned that sometimes the only way to maintain boundaries is to let people cross them completely, then show them the property line they'd stepped over. The deed was recorded. The ownership was clear. The dynasty belonged to the person who'd saved it. Me.